Hey, everybody, welcome back to the 30 Minutes of Fame podcast. Today I've got another amazing guest who has a story that, I guess, like myself, proves no matter how far you fall, you can rise back up. We got Robert here, better known on the X world as the X problem drinker, and I get that. I get that. He went from being homeless, addicted, to living what he calls a insane life of drugs, chaos, and rock bottom. Robert, welcome to my little show here.
Thanks, Dave. Uh, just really grateful to be here tonight. Humbled with you asking me to come on here and share my story. It happens occasionally, and each time it blows me away because 12 years ago, the last thing I would have thought was people would want to hear what I have to say, and in a useful way. So I'm just really grateful to be here with you right now.
Well, I appreciate you coming on, and you're like me. You're a fellow dad now. You're a family man, and I don't know about you, but I get these Facebook memories that come up every once in a while that I have no idea about any of these nights, and I'm like, holy, what an ass I was. But take me back 12 years ago, man. Where did that all start? What was your moment that put you back on this path? And we'll go from there.
Yeah, I like to make sure everybody understands that I consider myself in an untreated state an alcoholic. What that means to me is that when I drink, I want to drink more. Um, and if I'm not drinking, I'm thinking about drinking. That pretty much sums up my who I am as an alcoholic. I didn't always have a problem with drinking. I made it, ways down my journey in life without major consequences happening for a few decades there as an adult. Was a crab fisherman on the Bering Sea up in Alaska, went into law enforcement, spent 16 years in law enforcement. And towards the end of my law enforcement career, that's where, the drinking was really starting to take an effect. I could hold it together for, my 8, 9, 10 hours at work. No problems there. Multiple awards, Medal of Valor, working with inner city youth. But outside of work, man, I was just a mess. I was a mess, burning through relationships. Eventually, walking into the bar, so to speak, and handing that career up to the bartender and being traded for a drink. So I lost that career in 2009. And what happened after that was most people, again, the alcoholic state of mind is this is not a good thing that just happened. I just gave up a 16-year career to booze and at this time pain pills as well. Uh, maybe I should do something about it. And I will say that I trickled in and out of recovery meeting, 12-step meetings, but never fully grasping the nature of who I was. I'd go to a meeting or two and meet a couple nice people and would pretty much think, well, I'm not like you. I'm not homeless. I haven't been to prison. Haven't been to the psych ward yet. I haven't been to jail yet. And and so I couldn't quite wrap my head around that I was the problem yet. It was still the world. It was still the job. It was still the old job. It was the first ex-wife, the second ex-wife, the third ex-wife. They were the problem, not me. And and here I am, with I've destroyed a 16-year career. My children no longer want anything to do with me. Case in point, I show up to my ex-wife's house to pick up my kids for visitation, and she meets me at the door and says, "Your daughter doesn't want to see you anymore."
Oh,
And that might make a few people go, maybe I got a problem. Uh, but I pointed my finger at her and said she was the reason why my daughter didn't want to see me anymore. I was just absolutely out of my mind. Uh, eventually what happened was yeah, I ended up being introduced to methamphetamines. Strange as it may be, as an ex-cop, but I remember the night, been drinking, and some people invited me, and they put some of that out on the table, and I looked at it and I said, "That's meth," and they said, "Yes." I said, "Well, you don't look like the tweakers I used to arrest." And right there, my mind says, "Well, it's not that big of a deal." And that started about a 2-year journey downhill fast that involved me eventually becoming homeless, tent living, um, uncomfortable encounters with law enforcement, ended up in jail in the psych ward um, multiple times of a lot of guns pointed at me because of my behavior. I ended up being listed in the NCIC criminal database as an ex-suicidal SWAT officer, minimum 3 car, 2 sergeant response. Um, and this was in my hometown. So I was not paving a very positive path, uh, needless to say. But, you know, fortunately for me, right around December 10th or so of 2014, I was coming down off the backside of about a 7-day run on meth that had involved, again, another encounter with law enforcement where I tried to get them to shoot me, some domestic violence, damage to property. And I had a moment of clarity. We hear about it around the rooms, if you're in the rooms, or other programs where we have these sobering moments, I guess, because I wasn't sober, but I basically came to, and I'm standing in this little attached dwelling unit to a house that this gal I was running with rented, and I've ran her out, and I'm standing there in front of this man window, window from floor to ceiling, um, and look around. I barricaded the house up. The floors, I've ripped the floor looking for stuff, ripped the floor up, and I'm standing there butt ass naked with a big axe. And it dawned on me that I mean, I was almost positive at that point that I was expecting law enforcement to be coming. And so I had barricaded every other entrance to force them to come through the window. And that was the moment of clarity. Like, what is this? What are you doing, Robert?
Wow.
And the interesting thing is, my first thought wasn't to get sober. My first thought was to kill myself. And I took off up to the freeway that was a short distance away and stood on the overpass of the I-5 freeway that cuts down the center of Portland, Oregon, trying to get my nerve up to jump off. And time flies by, but I don't know how long I was standing there, but I don't have a lot of recollection of good, solid thinking. But the thought popped into my head about a year earlier when this gal and I were living in hotels before she got this place. We were running from hotel to hotel over on what's 82nd Avenue in Portland. It's the place you go to get what you need. And we were going from one hotel to another one. And as I'm walking down the road, I look over and there's this big facility, like a big warehouse, and then another building, but it's got a cross on it. And out in the parking lot, there's like 100 dudes walking from one side to the other. And I stopped and I'm staring over there. I'm like, what is this? And this gal goes, that's the Salvation Army ARC. It's a men's treatment program. That's the thought that popped into my head as I'm on the freeway, right? Like, and that was my next thought. Call the Salvation Army. Call the Salvation Army. And right now, I don't know, it was like 2 in the morning or something. And so I white knuckled it through the night. Still had a little corner of a baggie left and some stuff. And I didn't want to do any more. And so I picked up the phone the next morning and called the Salvation Army. And that was on a Friday, I think. And I made it through the weekend because they said I had to pee clean for booze and meth, and I could come in hot for weed, but nothing else. And so I showed up to the front doors of the Salvation Army on December 15th of 2014, and that's where my life began. Uh, I don't spend a lot of time in the details of my alcoholic and drug addict state. We all have war stories that really have no purpose. What's important to reflect on when I speak of my drinking is that I had zero control over it when I was. And if I wasn't, all I wanted to do was be doing it. That is all. That's what qualifies me as a drunk. It has nothing to do with the fact that I was in a tent setting up booby traps, running from cops. None of that has anything to do with it. But what's most important about all of this for me is the fact that I'm sitting here talking to you about how amazing recovery is, right? And like that was something I never, ever thought I'd be able to wrap my mind around, my head around. But, I checked into the Sally. I was out of my mind, batshit crazy. They made sure they told me that. Guys later on told me that. Like, I don't have much memory of it. You gotta, like, most of us have this experience that when we get sober, like really sober for the first time, it's been a long time, me taking something in to buffer me from the outside. So this is like the first time where there was nothing. Like I'm raw. And if you know anything about the Salvation Army, it's not a medical detox. There's no comfort pills handed out at the end of the night to help you go to sleep. They work you, right? Like it was a work program. And in order to stay there, you had to work. And it wasn't fun and it was uncomfortable. And I didn't like getting up at 5 in the morning and making my bed and tucking my shirt in and shaving my face. I didn't like any of that, but I liked it less, or I knew that ultimately I just knew I couldn't go back out. I knew that I could not go back out. I couldn't leave the doors of the Salvation Army. Um, And so I stayed. My first weekend there on a Friday afternoon or a Friday about this time of night, uh, they would bring guys in from the outside to do meetings. And this guy came in to bring a meeting, and I'm sitting in the back room, and my fists are just balled up, and I'm rocking because I'm just so uncomfortable, and I'm so out of my mind, and my brain chemistry's all messed up, and uh, and I remember looking up at this guy, and he'd sit back in his chair when he talked and open his hands. And he would just smile, a toothless smile, like he only had bottom teeth. And he went by Mad Dog Mike. But when he talked, I could feel that he had something that I wanted. And it wasn't how he looked, and it wasn't the fact that he pulled 14-hour days and then did service work. It wasn't that he drove a crappy truck. It was that he was the first man that, when I reflect back, that I've ever been in the with the presence of that truly had contentment and peace. And I'd never experienced that before. And I went up after the meeting. I couldn't even say a word. I just walked up to him. He looks at me and he goes, "Brother, you need peace." And I said, "Yes." And old Mike pulled out his notebook, went from page to page, and he goes, "Well, that'll make you my 16th sponsee I'm working with right now. I think I can fit you in." I mean, like, Mike saved my life. Mike showed up for me every week, would come into the Salvation Army and tell me he loved me and put his arms around me. And I started to believe it. He would sit with me when I was uncomfortable. And it wasn't that he was sensitive. He said the things that I needed to hear. And, uh, and he started me through the process of the 12 steps with uh, I don't know if your program allows me to speak openly about my 12-step program.
Anything you want, man.
Oh, all right. Yeah.
No
So,
filter here.
so Mike's what we call a 5%er in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. He does 95% of the work. That was my sponsor, right? And he got me going in the step work. He got me reading the big book. Got me writing gratitude lists in the morning, self-affirmation lists in the morning, teaching me stuff like, restraint and self-control. Does it need to be said? Does it need to be said right now? No. These simple things of learning how to reacclimate back into society. Um, and he was telling me stuff about love and peace and contentment and how to gain those things. And one of the challenges is after we're about 30 days working together, I'm about into month one or so. I'm still out of my mind, right? I've been put on restriction 3 times by this point for starting to get in altercations, not because I like to or want to, but because I'm not stable. And what we do to our brains is so impactful that it takes time for that to heal. But I'm wanting to be better every day, right? Like I'm wanting to do the right thing. I'm not wanting to act out. I'm not wanting to engage in old behavior. And he was just slowly directing me, as well as the Salvation Army. I mean, it's ran like a military boot camp. It's exactly what I needed. I needed to come into roll call every morning and hear the house manager say, "Your best decision making got you through the front door." I needed to recognize that. And so I'll give this example of learning about love. Uh, and it had to do a little bit with the big book. Another book I was reading, an Eckhart Tolle, A New Heaven or A New Earth, something like that. And so I'd go every morning after breakfast. We'd all funnel into the chapel and have kind of a morning huddle. We'd have a little bit of prayer, meditation, and then kind of duties for the day. And you're talking about like 120 dudes. And not to mention the fact, Dave, that I'm an ex-cop in a house of 100 and some ex-cons. Like I was uncomfortable all the time. And but I had to figure this thing out. And because I couldn't leave this alley, I knew if I left this alley, I was dead or going to prison, right? Like it was going to happen. And more likely than not, probably suicide by cop. I mean, that was just a no-brainer. Um, but so I started parking my butt at the front of the door when people walk into the chapel every morning. And for the first week, I would just shake guys' hand and tell them, "Hey, good morning, welcome." I became a greeter, a self-appointed greeter at the door. And then by the next week, I'm shaking their hands, telling them, "Good morning, I love you." And I'm starting to feel these things. And by the third week of doing it, man, there's a queue down the hall because I'm hugging every dude walking through the door. And that ain't me, right? Like that's not who I am. But I have, I had heard that in order to experience love, you must give it away as though you have it in abundance. And in doing that, you get it, right? Like, and so I tested it and it sure as shit, it was right. And so now these things are blowing my mind because it's contradicting the hate that I grew up with.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't come into sobriety uh, spotless. I grew up a racist. I grew up a bigot. I grew up a chauvinist. All of these things I'm shedding away, going, what the fuck, man? All this ignorance and hatred that made no sense to me. And so this whole time I'm going through these processes of growth. At the same time, Mike's taking me through the steps, the Salvation Army. And then month four, Sally's 6 months. And month four, he shows up some Friday night. He's like, "You're going to Hooper with me tonight." And Hooper Detox is downtown Portland, Oregon, and it's a free detox. So that should tell you what the quality is, right? It isn't much of a quality. People line up the street 6 o'clock in the morning every Tuesday. In fact, when I was running and gunning, I would drop that gal off there about every couple weeks in the morning. And so here I am going back there. Mike's at the Sally, you're going. I'm like, "Mike, what do I have? What do I have to bring to guys to give them any hope? I don't have a job. I'm unemployed. I'm not, no one's going to hire me with, being an ex-crazy cop. I don't have a girlfriend, family. Nobody wants anything to do with me. I'm in debt, blah, 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 blah." And he stuck his finger in my chest and goes, "Yeah, but you're sober." And then the light bulb came on, man. It was just like that. I needed to hear those things. Guys can't stay sober. I can stay sober. That's the only hope we have to give, right?
Right.
That's the catalyst for it all. And so I went to Hooper Detox with them. 30 guys come in blankets shaking and baking from a big room with cots. And I don't know what I said. I don't remember my share. But I remember we walked out backside of Hooper there to the parking lot, and it was a crystal clear night. Uh, it would have been probably mid, I don't know, June or so, early June when this happened, and or no, been late May. Pretty relevant, but I just remember looking up at the stars and feeling this just overwhelming sense of the spirit of the universe or God or this electricity going flowing through me. Like I couldn't even talk. I'm out there, and again, another light bulb moment. Oh, service work. This this is what they've been telling me. It's all about service work. And yeah, so then things just started to escalate in a positive way from there. I completed the program of the Salvation Army, and then we got to stay there for about 3 weeks while we figured out housing outside, and they kind of send you job placement wise. They sent me to this a material recycling facility. The guys that ran it, like the general manager and the yard boss, were both former Salvation Army graduates, but now they were, 20 years sober and 15 years sober. Um, and on this yard was heavy equipment, tractor trailers, trash, all this stuff. And here's another one with Mike. I go for the interview. I go for the interview. Dave, get this. I go in to talk to the general manager. I've got my Salvation Army, my tie, I'm buttoned up. I walk in. He's sitting at a desk, cowboy hat on, big old Fu Manchu. He looks up at me, and just he says, "What step are you on? Who's your sponsor? And what's your home group?"
Hmm.
And I knew I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Now I did still go back to the Sally that night and meet with Mike and complain. I said, "They're starting me at 9.25 an hour, Mike. Don't you know who I am? Like, I'm an ex-cop that used to pull close to 100 grand, man. I'm starting at minimum wage." And he looked at me and he goes, "That's 9.25 more an hour than you're making right now." And
Hmm.
I'm like, "Eh, valid point, buddy." Yeah. And so I get out of the Sally. I'm living in sober living. I'm going to this job and I'm going to meetings every single day. That's that we get out of the work and everybody on this yard is in recovery. You're talking about 40 guys that either came out of prison that they hire. They cater to guys coming out of the Sally and out of prison, everybody who wants to be sober. And so it's this incredible environment, like if I was in the X, because I eventually worked my way up through the yard, heavy equipment, got into management with them. But I remember one day I'm sitting in the excavator and not having a good day. And I was sitting there and all of a sudden I get a bang on the window and guys like, "Chuck, you okay? You okay, Robert?" And it was that environment where you could tell if your brother was struggling. And we had this nurturing environment for each other. And it was pretty cool. And at the same time, I'm going to meetings. And then all these, I think what I like to share is just these life events that, the one thing that's happening is I recognize that I'm not thinking about drinking. I'm not thinking about doing drugs, but then I'm still navigating life on life's terms. So like I got my first paycheck and I went straight over to the bank and got me $50 out and went over to the video poker machine, right? Like went over to the deli, play a little video poker. And I walked out of that place feeling the lowest I'd felt in 8 months because it was about 8 months. And I'm like, "What are you doing, man? What are you doing?" And so that started this different process where I'd go to the bank, make sure my bills were paid, sober living, have a little food, and then whatever was left over that I didn't put a little bit into savings, I'd turn it into $5 bills. And then me and my buddies, we'd go down to Skid Row on Saturday morning and go hang out with our brothers who's still drinking and hand out some $5 bills to our brothers. And I'm not here to, some people have opinions. I don't give two shits what people's opinions are. I know that if I give my brother $5 and it helps him get by instead of sticking a gun in someone's face, I'm going to give him $5, right? Like I don't want my brothers and sisters out there to have to do stuff that they're going to regret for a lifetime. But when I would do that, when we'd go do these things, uh, again, I'd have these spiritual experiences, I would just feel this overwhelming sense of goodness. And so that was the trajectory I was on. And then about 10 months sober, Now I've got my license back because the guys that I worked with paid all my fines, helped me get caught up in child support, um, got me my CDL, paid for my Class A CDL. Um, and so now I'm going back to the Salvation Army for service commitments. One of my service commitments is I would drive this minibus from the Salvation Army over to the west side of Portland to what they called the West Side Speaker Meeting. It was like a Hollywood style. I mean, everybody had their suits and tuxes on. It wasn't my kind of jam, but the guys liked to go to it, so I would take them there. And this one day I'm getting ready. I'm in the shower and I was just kind of thinking, I just started having these thoughts about where I was in life, 10 months sober. I mean, living and sober living. And I just had this complete sense of peace with the idea that if my life involves nothing more than living and sober living and working with other men to help them get sober, I'm cool with that.
Wow.
And I never had that before, right? And immediately following that, Dave, I had the strongest spiritual experience I've ever had. And my sponsor had one like it too. And he explained it better than I can. And it was as though God took a fistful of love, shoved it down into my chest, and all my hatred disappeared. And I almost collapsed in the shower. Like it was just, I can't even, my lexicon's too limited to say what it was or why it was. But it was the first time in my life, and at this point, I was 44. It was the first time in my life where I felt content. I'd never felt content before. And the cool thing about that is in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, in the doctor's opinion, Dr. Silkworth points out a man that he sat with that was basically of the type of no recovery, right? Like when he first met him, no recovery. Like this guy is doomed. But the guy picked up the ideas in the program. There was no big book at the time, but in the program, and then revisited him a year later, and he said that the guy, no resemblance of the guy that had shown up, and there sat a man brimming with self-reliance and contentment. And that is what I relate to the most in the big book is that we get to experience a different way of feeling, right? We get to experience a new way of living. And it just took some action on my part. But to live with this peace and this contentment, I'd never had that before. Life had always been a fight. I was always looking and finding, right? Like ex waking up expecting a fight. It didn't matter. And it was just that was my whole life. I just happened to make a couple of good choices and and kind of get sheltered from the demons inside of me because I wore a badge for 16 years. Kind of kept me out of trouble. And but so here I am doing this Sally thing, and I'm like, oh man, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I love it. I can't picture doing anything else. And then about month 11, so about a month later, now I made a commitment that I wouldn't date nothing for a year. And uh, and that included my interaction with women at meetings or otherwise. I didn't hug women. I didn't sit around and talk because I was a problem, right? I was a problem, and I didn't know why I was a problem. I later found out that the problem was a lot of things, but mainly I'd never had intimate, meaning close relationships with men. Men were always a threat. And I mean, when I get to the root cause of it. And so Alcoholics Anonymous and the meetings and hanging out with dudes, like prioritizing that allowed me to come to a place where I was finally able to embrace what it meant to be brothers, not only in recovery, but just in the sense of the word with other men, to where it was no longer this fear or insecurity, right? That lended itself to poor behavior in my relationship with women, and the cheating, the lying, the manipulating. So I stayed out of all that. I stayed away from that. Stayed away from the women, and but month 11. I'm sitting in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, man, and this gal opens her mouth and starts spitting wisdom from the other room, and I'm like, I don't know who this gal is, but I want to know who she is. Not in the sense like the old behavior, but I'm like, that's a powerful woman in sobriety, and I want to get her number so I can send women her way. And blah, 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 exchange phone numbers. And next thing I know, she'll tell you a different story, but she started sending me little jokes. And
Oh,
yeah, yeah, she likes to say that it was me, but I don't think so. So she started sending these little jokes, and I was like, oh, whoa, wait a second. I guess this is something. So anyway, long story short, at a year sober, I called her up and said, hey, you want to be my life partner? And I don't know what that means, but you seem to be on the same because she was highly involved in the program too, like working with women, doing service work. And I'm just like, I think that we can make something happen. She's like, hell yeah, let's do it, and that started our journey. Now it wasn't, it wasn't always let me just say this. About 2 months in, I blew the relationship up. Not through old behavior, but just my inability to be emotionally stable quite yet. And so she backed away from it, rightfully so, right? And the reason I bring this up because this was another pivotal part of my recovery. I'm now like a year and 3, 4 months sober, and I knew that I couldn't, like, old behavior was what? Best way to get over someone's get under someone. And I knew that that was not something that I wanted anything to do with. Like, if this wasn't going to work, I was back on the path of recovery, men, hanging out with my dudes. And so I just threw myself harder into recovery during this time. Not to say that it was easy, right? I really cared about her. I thought we could. And but what happened, there was an event that took place. It was I woke up one Saturday morning and feeling fine, feeling fine. And every Saturday morning I had I'd get up, I'd go to my meeting, and then a couple of us would go downtown. We'd either take little cards that we'd fill like you're loved and hand them to our brothers, whatever. We'd take toilets, whatever. And this was a Saturday morning where I decided I'm going to take time for me. I'm going to take me time. One of the biggest misnomers there is, let me tell you. All right. And so my me time was click on the television, watch a little Netflix, and just, I'm going to hang out in my room for a little while. So I was laying there probably for about an hour or so. And then just like that, man, I sat up in bed. I looked around my room. I'm living in a sober living house, basement bedroom, wood paneling on the walls, great big box TV, single little bed, and I all of a sudden saw everything as bad. Like my gratitude was gone. And I looked in the closet and I looked at the rack that you hang your clothes on, and I thought, I wonder if that'll hold me if I hang myself.
wow.
And it shocked me. It shocked me when that came out to the point where I was like, what's, what just happened? What is going on? Chuck, get up. So I forced myself up. I put my boots on, jumped in my car, drove down to the 12 by 12 club on Gleason Avenue in Portland, which was my home group. And sitting outside on the bench was one of my brothers that I went through the Sally with who had fallen off the wagon and was had obviously been living on the streets again. And there he was sitting on the bench, man. And I jumped out. We, gave him a big old hug. I'm like, what's going on? He's like, I'm done. I'm like, you're done. Yeah. And I'm like, let's do this thing. So we spent the rest of the day. I got him a place to live at my house, got him 3 days on the couch, got him a pair of boots, called my boss up. I got him a job, got him some work clothes, went to the food pantry, got him some food. And, at the end of that we went to a couple meetings. At the end of that day, I again another spiritual experience, right? Like I couldn't go to sleep because I was so overwhelmed with goodness, feeling like so much joy. And that was the last time I ever thought about suicide. And so I was starting to make direct correlations, action with a result, right? Action, result. And this one was so powerful to me because I had taken immediate action only because I had a lot of previous discipline and getting up Saturday mornings and going to do something. Like sitting in front of the TV is something I hadn't done in a year and a half. And so when I experienced that thought of suicide, I was able to snap out of it only because I'd been doing the same thing every day, opposite that for a year and a half, right? I had built a platform that I could springboard off of to do the right thing versus the wrong thing. And so just like that thought, the really cool thing about that is when I went looking, when I actively took action to go look for opportunity to do something, God placed a man in my path to occupy me all day long, to where I was no longer thinking about poor me in my shitty little bedroom with the old TV, right? Like took me completely out of self. And the interestingly enough, about a few, not too long after that, my now wife, then girlfriend, who broke up with me, we mended ways and made a go of it. But Dave, uh, I could go on and on with the good stories, but the piece of this puzzle that, and I know it's hard for some people, is that I didn't do this on my own, right? I didn't willpower my way into sobriety. Um, I can't think good thoughts or do holistic stuff, which it's cool if you can. And the guys that I got sober with can't either, right? Like they can't either. We actually had to follow an already proven method. I did, and that was through the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I had, because I'd tried to get sober many times before, but this process of getting to a point where I'm humble enough to say that I need some help, that I need to take some direction. I mean, I'm homeless. I'm homeless, living in a tent, trying to convince people that I'm on vacation. That's who I was. No, I'm out here because I'm on vacation. Like I had no sense of reality around what I could control and what I couldn't control. But once I sobered up, I realized I had no control. And nor could I control whether I could get sober or stay sober. I had to, just by saying, I'm going to stay sober, not going to drink again, solemn oath, right? How many of those had I sworn off? How many times had I promised, begging for forgiveness or don't leave me? Oh, I won't do this again. And every single time I got loaded again. And this is the first time and that I'd stayed sober. But it's all related to this process that I went through in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I hear a lot of people on, we're not here, you read on X, like, and I'm not here to say one way or the other what people should do. But what I know about Alcoholics Anonymous is you can go to a shitty meeting. Trust me, you can. But there are other meetings that you can go to. There are more places you can go to, and there's not just AA. You got NA, you got Celebrate Recovery. There's all kinds of opportunities out there for people to get sober. But if you're a drunk like me, if you fit my description, if you're similar to me, if anything I've said resonates, then my suggestion is you do what guys like me have already done and proven it to work, if that makes sense. Um, but I have an incredible life today. Like the job I was in put me in a position to get hired by a nationwide hauling company, a garbage company. These guys right here, Republic Services. Um, and that allowed my wife and I to move back here to Michigan. I tell people this story, people that understand get it. But when Republic Services called me up because I was working for them in Portland, and we applied out here to get closer to family, our extended family, and they offered me the job, they also paid my way to move out here. And yeah, and I tell people that. That's the first time in a couple decades where when I moved, someone wasn't shoving a garbage bag in my face saying, pack your shit and get out. You know, that was that means something to me, right? Like that's a big deal. That this company would put their faith in me, that I had done the right thing long enough that people believed that I could do the right thing for a while. And so we came out here to Michigan, and one of the first things we do when we get to places, even when I travel, is I find a meeting. And I've been to Boston this summer and Toledo and Columbus last summer. or last summer, and each time I get to those places, man, the first thing I do is establish myself in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. Not because the thought of drinking for me, gone, right? Like it's gone. I haven't thought about drinking in over 10 and a half years. And the last time I did think about it when I was sober, it was a fleeting thought, right? It was just a boy, that looks delicious. They didn't have that when I was drinking.
Mm-hmm.
And but then it's gone, right? The whole idea of it's gone. But I stay connected to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I maintain my service commitments, taking meetings into Pine Rest Detox here in Grand Rapids, a far cry, a far cry further up the food chain than Hooper Detox. Let me tell you, it's Club Med here. And but they still have people hurting, right? They still have people there that need us. So getting involved right when I got here to Grand Rapids, I was just it just solidifies my recovery. It keeps me in check, gets me connected, gives me opportunities to be of service. And I mean, I don't share my wife's story, but it's obvious, she's in recovery too. If you ever have an opportunity to check her out, I would. She's way easier to look at than me. So. But she too connecting, like that's our big thing is getting connected. So that brings me here. That's where I'm at. I've had a couple kids in sobriety, man, it blows my mind. They've never seen me drunk. I'm the same dude that when I leave in the morning, the same dude comes to the house because I've learned how to regulate my emotions.
Mm.
I don't have a bad day. I have a challenging day. I don't bring work home. We have a household where we don't do certain things. We don't talk about politics. We don't talk about hot topics. I don't out there either. I took the 10th tradition of Alcoholics Anonymous and applied it to my life in a universal sense. I work with guys. I work with guys that, I sponsor guys and I remember one time one of my sponsees, we were just amongst a group of guys and they were kind of talking about some stuff like politics. And I was just standing there and he turned to me and he goes, you know what? I've known you for like 8 months and I don't even know what religion you are or your political beliefs. And I looked at him and smiled and I said that I'm doing it the right way,
Mm.
what I'm supposed to do, right? My hope or your hope in me is to be able to achieve sobriety, peace, contentment, happiness. I don't have a dog in the race of trying to convince you to believe something outside of that. Like I have a lot of evidence. I have a lot of evidence that the program of Alcoholics Anonymous works. I have no evidence about anything else, so I'm going to stick with what I know. That's the program of Alcoholics Anonymous.
You know what's
Um,
cool, man? As you mentioned the Salvation Army. I grew up. My parents were Salvation Army officers, and
oh,
my
it's awesome.
my very first job, well, my second job I ever had was working in a Salvation Army warehouse, loading and unloading trucks of like donations for a Salvation Army. And every coworker of mine was an ex-convict or an ex someone in recovery. It was all I was like 17 years old, working with all ex-convicts. I learned a lot of curse words, um, but you don't know, right? Like these, to me, they were just regular people. Someone's like, "Oh, you work with all convicts. What's up? Like you're gonna turn into one?" I'm like, no. And then my brother, who since the age of like 25, for like 25, 30 years, has worked in the same type of Salvation Army recovery center in downtown Toronto.
That's awesome.
So I mean, every day when I went to work, I passed people that were like outside, like doing stuff in the alley before they started their job, trying to be sneaky. But I never looked down at anyone, and it stuck with me. Little connections, man, and like I love
Incredible.
the Salvation Army. I mean, I try and when I see a kettle at Christmas, I'll throw money in there, but it's you never know what people are going through, and that was probably my. I'm 17 years old, working with ex-cons, but I still remember some of those guys. I still remember those French curse words the truck driver from Montreal taught me. But it all sticks with you. But I want to ask you about something here because I noticed I was just going through your old tweets and just reading some posts for this interview, and there was a moment that you posted about when you were looking at your kid's first report card. I think like second grade, and I know for me, when I found out I was gonna become a dad, and I was like drinking 6 nights a week, it's still I'm like just a total asshole. I'm like, how can I take care of another life when I can't even take care of myself? And I can remember looking at her first report card, and that's kind of what stuck with me. So when you're reading through and people are telling you stuff about your kid and how your kid acts, How heavy did that hit you? Like it hit me.
Well, I mean, it there's a lot of stuff that happens in my life where I still, it's not that I don't accept it. I just, I get so overwhelmed with emotion around the idea that uh, this is evidence of me being a positive influence. And because I wasn't, I have three grown children that grew up with a drunk dad, that they're now grown, and those relationships, um, one of them has yet to be completely rectified, but that will all happen in time. So to have this opportunity to watch these two little ones that I have, a second grader and a young five, grow up, and to watch them bring report cards home like that, where uh, you know, testing above grade levels. They're reading. They're they're considered. They're friends with everybody. My little boy accepts everybody. He's friends with his whole class. Like it just there I am with tears running down my face because that's we many of us didn't necessarily have those tools given to us when we were growing up, and for whatever reason, um, but to be part of that and know that it's all stems from me not picking up a drink and not doing a drug, and not engaging in old behavior and not lying and cheating and stealing. Like it's like it blows my mind uh to watch this, watch them grow and blossom, and they don't live in a house full of chaos. They don't, mom and dad aren't screaming at each other. Um, and I'm not here to judge people, man. That's not why I say these things. I'm just saying they don't exist in my house. It's not to say that every day's popcorn, cotton candy, but we understand that the meat and potatoes of our relationship has to do with our emotional stability and our ability to navigate the storms in a constructive way, with critical thinking and open dialogue. And I learned all of this from the men in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, man. That's where, like, this is not who I was 12 years ago. And I'm not even talking about before in my drunken days. I'm talking about before that. Like, this is not who I was. And this is all a result. And I don't like to use the term gift, Dave. And I, I'm oftentimes one of the guys that will ruffle a few feathers in the rooms when I flat out say I'm not a miracle, man. I am a product. I'm the result, right? Everybody can have this result. Therefore, it's not miraculous. It is an event that takes place when I take action. I tell people that I am in a working relationship with God. I put in the work, God gives me a paycheck. Guess what? That's not miraculous. That is an agreement, you know. If I were to tomorrow, just think about this. What if Bill and Bob, they got each other sober back in the day, and old Bill's like, all right, let's grab Lois and the kids and go to the beach, man. They'd got drunk again, right? Even though they thought their sobriety, they thought their moments of recovery were miraculous, they'd have got drunk again. Like it's that simple. If I stop doing things like when you ask me, hey, will you be on my podcast? Man, this shit scares the shit out of me, Dave. It's not like I want to be, have my face splashed all over. That makes me nervous still, right? Kind of like the cops behind you type of thing. Uh, you still got those things. Or, when my buddy's like, hey, man, I can't make it to detox Friday. Can you take my turn? I don't want to. No, I don't want to. Like I get up at 2 in the morning, and by Friday at this time, I'm pretty tired. But I don't do it because I want to. I do it because it's my duty. And when I follow through with my duty, good things happen in my life.
Hmm.
And the first thing that happens is I don't want to drink, or I stay not wanting to drink. Second thing is I don't think about killing myself. Third thing is I don't think about killing you. And the fourth thing is I want to be a good man. Like I want to be a good man. And that's why, if I circle way back to the war stories, I don't tell my war stories, man, because that wakes up the ego demon in me, and I don't need to do that. Like the bottom line is in my untreated state of alcoholism, I drink until I pass out or get intervened, and once I'm drinking, I'm calling the dope man. That's what it is. And so I do everything I can to avoid ever having to step foot back into the arena of being a drunk, a low bottom drunk and a drug addict. So I mean that kind of sums up who I am.
I love it. Now, one thing that popped in my head just listening to your stories here was with you being a former cop and then being on the streets with people. How did that change your outlook? Like from when you had those old run-ins when you had on a badge to like it's got to be a lot. Like every second call of the night coming up to people just being unruly in public, or just how did that change your perception of homeless people after that?
See, that's an excellent question right there. I can tell you that my first experience, because in that world, right, the world of law enforcement, um, if people that are in it, you tend to click up with other cops. I mean, your friends become other cops. Your world gets very small, and there's a lot of reasons around that. Why? Because I had friends before I was, where I grew up, but I just slowly shifted. And so you do take on some, you can take on some pretty jaded ways of looking at things. Maybe compassion in some aspects, but in the end, for me, it was just survival. But I ended up going to my first treatment center. I went to two different treatment centers when I was in law enforcement. And the first one was me sticking my hand up, going into my supervisor, going, my life's out of control, and I got to get this dialed in. And I don't know what to do. And so they sent me to treatment, and that was when I was in this treatment center with people. Now everybody in there is sober, and then I start hearing the stories, and I'm like, oh my God, man, you're just like me. But if we were back home, you're the guy that I'm fighting on the streets, or the
Mm.
homeless guy, or whatever. And it did. All of a sudden, I had this whole different perspective and compassion for when I did go back to the job. I started looking at things differently. Um, and not that I was ever unfair. I did a 16-year career without one complaint of excessive force or a constitutional violation. Now, some people will be like, "Well, you didn't do your job." No, I did my job. I just did my job the right way, and I got the medals to prove it. But it definitely shifted my perspective with my first treatment center. So once I was out there, it wasn't a stretch, for me to accept or be accepted. I didn't. The one thing that I'm grateful for is I am an isolator. So, I didn't click up on the streets, so to speak, in any sort of homeless camp or anything. I was a solo kind of a guy, and that probably lended itself to me hitting the bottom sooner because we can find community anywhere, good or bad. And so I'm grateful that I didn't, because had I found community out there on the streets, I probably wouldn't have made it back.
Wow.
Uh, I mean, that's the way I feel about it. So, I'm glad I was the way I was. I'm glad I was pretty much stay the F away from me type of a guy. But yeah, that's a great question. So it was shifted definitely.
Well, I got one more not so great question, and then we'll call this an episode. But it's just my stupid way I end all my shows. But I want to thank you for coming on with me, man, and sharing your story. I felt a lot of that because I've been around a lot with the Salvation Army and things my girlfriend's told me about her experience and just people I met off here. But I think I've done, like, we're at 87 episodes, and at least 20 of them have some sort of run in with the Salvation Army. So it's
Mm.
kind of the one, so many people. I don't know. I love that charity. I've been around it my whole life, but It's beautiful. But here's my final question for you, and a 100-meter pigeon carrying contest. How many pigeons could you hold in your arms and still have in your arms when you finish the race?
A 100-meter pigeon carrying contest. Well, how many do I have to begin with?
However many you can fit in your arms. So say you put them in your arms, and just how many pigeons could you carry 100 meters? It's not a riddle. It's just a stupid question to
I
give you.
I could fit, I don't know, like this many. Let's say 100 pigeons for 100 meters.
Well,
$150.
that's gonna put you in a solid second place, man. Only one person's ever answered higher than that, so that's impressive.
Maybe I still have some ego problems, Dave.
Maybe. Well, that's he was the Arnold Schwarzenegger impersonator. He said he was gonna put bird seed all over his arms, and that was
I'm
pretty funny.
gonna grab on and hang on.
But yeah, one last thing here on your bio on Twitter, the evil Twitter, where I keep meeting all these amazing people. It says DM for help and collab. What's your mission there?
Um, I want to be available. I work with guys, like I do go to the Salvation Army here in Grand Rapids. I sponsor guys. Um, I want to be a lifeline if needed, when needed. Uh, I attempted sponsorship online a couple years ago through, guys would get a hold of me on Twitter. Couple different times where basically we would meet on FaceTime. Guys were different states. I had one guy that was in a different country that never ended up actually calling, but it started out on the DM. Uh, but I don't. My experience is it's not. It's better for me to try and help you navigate getting to where you need to be to find that sponsorship in person, direct contact. So the DM part is definitely open for discussion. Struggling with life, how do you live life on life's terms? Where I can be a little more open, where I can be a little more transparent. I believe in living a transparent life, but even on Twitter, I'm guarded. Uh, I don't use my real name. Like, could someone figure it out? Yeah, I'm sure it wouldn't be that difficult. Would I really care? No. But the DM is there for guys. The collab thing, I don't know. If someday I go into business or something, who knows? Actually, okay, the collab thing is because when I was going on Grok and asking what I should put, he said put that. So I did. Yeah. That's
I
all
love
that
it.
is.
All right, everybody. His link is going to be in the description if you use Twitter. I love it. There's such a community on there for weight loss and recovery, and just people like me and people like Robert. But don't forget to like, subscribe, all that cool shit my daughter tells me to say. And just say one nice thing to someone every day, and it'll change someone's life. And that's all for us today.